are in the, we are past all the flintlocks and all of the Civil War era, kind of pre-Civil War to American history here in Fort Lewis, and I think we're in the Fort Lewis area, so we're going to see a lot of artillery uniforms and a lot of history about artillery, mostly because we are a coastal fort here in Fort Lewis. So come over here, we got some uniforms here before they introduced the khaki uniforms. If you come closer here, you'll see that on this uniform here, of course it's artillery, which red means artillery back then, and blue means infantry, and then yellow means cavalry. So we have a red and blue tunic here, and on the side it has that little gun shell. If you can see that little gun shell there, that means that this guy is a loader and an aimer, and what he does, his job for an artillery squad is to aim and fire the artillery. And then over here we have just an officer uniform for artillery, and again red here. It's a little bit more fancy because he is an officer. He's got a nice belt buckle on and everything, and then on the sides you can see the rank on the sides, and then also on his shoulders as well. Then over here we have, this is when we go a little bit more modern into the 19th century with our, definitely especially our uniforms. Right here we have a signalman, again because we are a coastal fort as well. And then over here we have, this is when we finally start getting into the khakis. Now, these guys right here, they did have the original blue tunics, navy blue tunics, and sky blue trousers. And this is actually our first example of khaki uniforms finally coming into play in olive drab colors. So, and this guy is a master sergeant. So, and then if we go over here, if we come closer here, we have a good example of a gas mask bag. Now, this is our first example of actual gas mask production for the U.S. Army, which, of course, like I said, this is our first gas mask ever issued to enlisted men and our fighting guys before World War I, working up to World War I. But this is actually modeled off of the British that designed it first. And before the British was the Germans. So over here, if you come closer here, you can see this is more your standard, because that uniform that we saw before with the more of a light khaki version, that's more of kind of like during the Rough Riders era and stuff with Roosevelt and the Spanish War. And now we actually are finally getting to World War I looking uniforms here, and this is your standard uniform here on base or on the field as well. And so, yeah. And then we'll come over here, and if we turn around here, this is a really cool uniform here. This is, instead of a khaki, it's more of a dark green, forest kind of green, and this is not U.S. Army. This is your U.S. Marine uniform. And the cool thing about the Marines is their uniform has stayed somewhat true over the decades, and we still, of course, you have the rank insignia there. There's Master Sergeant, who is also drill instructors for the U.S. Marine Corps. And then if you come over here, we have a good example of artillery, since we are finally into the World War I section. Of course, if anybody knows anything about World War I, it's definitely artillery. Artillery was one of the biggest components about World War I. It was one of the deadliest components. And so again, here we see a uniform here in red. See the red piping on the hat there, on the field cap. That stands for artillery, of course. And we have a good example of U.S. artillery. And this is kind of our first example of good coordinated artillery when it comes to modern warfare. So, yeah, take a good look at that. Do a little pan around real quick. And again, this is a U.S. Marine Corps artillery uniform as well. I'm a little bit expert on uniforms, in case you didn't notice. So this is, I'm pretty sure that we haven't gone through the whole museum at all. We just started at the beginning, and this I'm pretty sure is just the history of Fort Lewis throughout the ages. And then I think on the other side, we're finally going to get into more generalized warfare for the U.S. Army. So come over here. This is, as soon as I saw this, it kind of made me think of General Pershing here with his expeditionary force in World War I. This is just your standard infantry officer's uniform here. He's got his saber here. He's got his nice boots here. And if you can see, if you come closer here, he's a lieutenant. He has one gold bar. That means he's a first lieutenant. Second lieutenant would be silver bar on the piping there. And then on the shoulder there, if you can see those blue and white stripes right there, that is the same division that, I forget the name of the division. It's also over here on this uniform as well, which I think you can probably see it a little bit better. But this is the same division actually fought the Germans in North Africa and also Sicily and Italy as well. So that's pretty cool. And I don't know if I think these are cavalry, first of all. These are cavalry, but I don't know. I lost my train of thought. So over here, we're finally getting out of the World War I sort of era, and we are moving into, and just so you know, those uniforms back there, the ones that we just saw, were more 1920s and 1930s, and now we're finally getting into the 1940s and late 1930s and stuff like that. So this is your standard uniform for World War II, and if you come really close here, this patch here is the patch specifically for Fort Lewis, and I'm pretty sure that they were not in combat at all during World War II. But he's also a staff sergeant here, and 2 years of service, 2 tours. And if you come really close here, you'll see he's also artillery. There on the button, you can see he's in A Company artillery, and then he's got his whistle here, and because he is a non-commissioned officer, that's called an NCO, is what they call them. And if you can see right there, if you can zoom in really close to this right here, these are, you would get these during training, and basically they were, you could master, they were basically like kind of degrees in warfare, and you can master in these different degrees here. As you can see, he's got 3 different masters in field artillery, and then he also has 1 in pistol combat. Now, and this is still the same way today, but when a serviceman gets these, it's basically like a test. You fill out the paperwork to take the test, and then you demonstrate your capability, and usually aiming with a pistol and stuff like that, or field artillery, and then you're graded on it, and if you pass the test, then you get rewarded this, and it also increases your pay as well. And it's been from back then all the way until today, and it's still the same thing today in present. So we got some good examples of some, this of course, all this is original here, of weapons during the Second World War. So this here is a Springfield rifle. This is a bolt action, okay? And this is used from the First World War. And when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor and we went into Guadalcanal, and especially Guadalcanal being our first major conflict in the Pacific, our Marines were issued with Springfield rifles, which were kind of considered old back then. And a good, in one case, after the fighting kind of was going on in Guadalcanal, some actually, even though that was a Marine operation, some U.S. forces came along in Guadalcanal, which they were outfitted with more, because the Marines were kind of considered the underdogs of the U.S. military and kind of the bad guys. So they were kind of outfitted with outdated stuff, and the U.S. military got all the good stuff, and that's when they came with the M1 rifles, if you can see right here. And this is our first, it's not bolt action, and it's all automatic, and you can fire off, I think, like 9 rounds or something like that. And it was pretty nice for its time. It still lives up to the day too. But those U.S. Army guys that came on Guadalcanal had these, and they were brand new. And a lot of the Marines actually came in and stole a lot of the M1 Grands, which was of course illegal because that's U.S. military property. But they were really happy to have the new rifle there. And then here we got a good example of a M1 carbine or carbine, whatever you say. I say carbine. Now this was usually made for mortar squads. It's not a full-on a weapon for a full-on rifleman, but it's designed more as it takes pistol rounds. So if you think about that, a rifle round is pretty big, about that big, and then pistol rounds are about that big. Okay, so but it's just something that at least you have something to defend yourself. This was usually carried by radio men, bazooka men, mortar men, and just other kind of specialist MOSs for the U.S. military. MOS means job in military standards, if you didn't know that. And then, of course, your M19, which has been from World War I all the way until today. We still issue it today. It's one of the greatest handguns ever. And just a quick history lesson. We were actually, Germany was making the Luger, which is very famous for the Second World War, and they came to the U.S. military and said, hey, we have this great handgun, would you like to, issue it to your entire army and, make a lot of money and all that, and it's a good gun. And they tested it, and then they also tested the M1911, the M1911, and because they actually liked the Luger a lot better, but because the M1911 was U.S. made, they went with the M19, and then they finally went to the decision, okay, let's go to the P08 Luger, and the Germans were like, no, you had your chance, no thank you. And plus, they already knew that they were going to get into war with U.S. during the First World War, and so but we still got the M19 though, still today. So, and then this is called a BAR. This is a Browning automatic machine gun. Browning meaning the manufacturer, Browning, who made a lot of guns from the Second World War. And this is more of a automatic firing gun, so it fired very fast, and it was a really good. It was kind of like it was the middle of a rifle and a machine gun, and so it's kind of like in the middle there, and it brought a lot of developing firepower to a standard infantry squad, which actually, this is in a World War II. This is the World War II version, but there was actually a first version, and that was used by the U.S. Marine Corps in the First World War. So if we go down this way here, we're going to see more weapons for World War II. And right here we have the M1 Thompson. And this was mostly used for NCOs, again, non-commissioned officers, so sergeants and up, which, of course, NCOs were there to lead riflemen and stuff, and they were in charge of them, and then officers were in charge of NCOs. So, and this was more of this is a later version here. The beginning version, the more Tommy gun kind of that you see in the 30s from the gangster movies and all that. They had a version of that, but it didn't have that drum mag. It just had a stick, and it didn't have the handle either. And then they switched to this one. This is a finally military issue because, again, the Tommy guns were made by manufacturers that weren't U.S. military manufacturers, and now this is an official first look at a military weapon for the Thompson. And then over here we have a grease gun. Okay, now this is a really cool gun if you come over here and zoom in. Now, Thompsons were very expensive to make. And if you can see, there's a lot of components to it. And they came out with this gun, and this is called the grease gun. And this was it's stamped metal. Okay, it's not casted iron, it's stamped metal, and it's just welded together, and it was really cheap, but it was fast to make. And in the middle of World War II, you needed to produce a lot of guns because World War II is happening. So they came out with the grease gun. And then this here is this is a Browning machine gun right here, and again Browning for Browning, the gun manufacturer. And this was basically standard. This is an M1919. This was their basic standard machine gun for a rifle platoon in World War II. And this was served in the U.S. Army, the Marine Corps, basically everywhere during World War II. And this also actually saw service up to the Korean War as well, and also Vietnam too. And you can actually still find some examples of the M1919 from Korea in World War II, still in Afghanistan today, in Iraq, and all that. And then if you come over here again, we have another M1 Grand, and then this is your standard kit for your World War II U.S. Enlisted men's uniform. So here, this is an M42 jacket here, and if you come closer here, so if you see movies in like Saving Private Ryan and stuff, you'll see that they have more of a khaki light uniform. That is the M41. This is the M42, and this was actually an olive drab, and that was issued again, 42 meaning 1940, or 43 meaning 1943. It was issued, and then you got some bandoliers here. Bandoliers are basically just kind of strips that would hold cartridges for the M1 Grand. So then come over here. Oh, and also, if you see down here, those little things that go around right here on the boots, those are called gaiters. And before, you had gaiters that were up to here, and then you would lace them up on the side, and they would be really big, and they would be canvas. They'd be khaki canvas. And then they came out, once they came out with the M43 uniform, they also came out with these rubber gaiters as well, and this was part of the new uniform for late in World War II. So, and then if we come over here, before we end the video here for just the World War II and World War I section, this is some uniforms for females in the military during the 1940s. And here we have a uniform of a nurse. And you can tell the nurse because of the kind of medical symbol, I don't know what you would call that, medical symbol there on the collar. And she is a lieutenant as well, if you can see on the field cap there, the gold bar. And then also, this is actually really cool over here. This uniform, this blue one, is a librarian uniform here for the U.S. military. So this is what the librarians would use and would wear. Pretty cool. So when we come back, we'll start on the Vietnam section and Korea section as well. Okay, so one thing that I pointed out when we stopped the video, I instantly looked at this and it says the Korean War for this uniform, Korean War era. Now, the thing is, just think, war ends in 1945. We just got done with World War II, basically the biggest conflict the world has ever seen, ever, still today. And we have all these uniforms, all these weapons of warfare, right? And so once 1950 comes around, we start going into the Korean War. We have a lot of surplus stuff from the Second World War, and this here is still the same uniform that was used in the 1940s in World War II. This still is the the M43 jacket and trousers, because it's that olive drab instead of a khaki uniform. So we still use those in Korea, just so you know. So I wasn't messing up or anything like that. It was and we also did use Emma Grands in Korea as well. And same with Thompsons and carbines, and everything that we used in World War II, we also used in Korea. The only thing that really changed was vehicles. We introduced helicopters, like in MASH. Have you ever seen MASH? The first helicopters are used there, and also tanks as well, like Pershing tanks. But we still use the Shermans as well, and a lot of the EZ-8s, as they were called. A lot of the equipment that we used in World War II was used in Korea as well, because again, we have all that surplus, and also it's not that far of a gap between World War II and Korea. It's only by 5 years. So just want to make that point. lot of stuff here and a lot more content. If you can kind of like take a little pan around, we have a lot to see, and I'm really excited. All right, so let's go over here. We start out with the Philippine-American War here, and we see little things like cannons from the Philippines and stuff like that. And this is, of course, when America starts kind of getting involved in the Pacific and starts kind of putting our territory on certain things, like the Philippines. So if we come over here, we see a good uniform of around the time of before the Rough Riders with Roosevelt and the Spanish War. This is the Philippine War right here, and as you can tell, we still have it's a little more modern than the Civil War. We still have that kind of blue trousers, but it has a white piping here, meaning infantry. For that time, they got rid of the blue, meaning infantry, and it's now white. And if you can see here, we have some canvas gaiters here. This is so that way rocks and stuff doesn't cut your legs and stuff if you're going through the jungle or the desert or anything like that. So that protects you from that. And then we have a really nice, more modernized musket here. And if you come really close, we can see the ammo cartridge belt here. And this is actually when the U.S. Army starts making actual cartridge cases for guns with a brass fitting around them, with gunpowder inside of them, and everything is just right then and there. So that way, now that way you don't have to put the powder in, then ram the mini ball down in the chamber, put a percussion cap on there, on that area right there. That's all done. Everything is all made for you. Now that the Industrial Revolution is happening, we can actually make more modernized bullets for troops, and of course that means more faster firing as well. And then if we come over here, here's some more Philippine uniforms. This one is actually really cool. This one here, if you can see, if you come close, is actually worn by this. They actually have the photograph of the guy who wore this exact uniform here. And this is the 1st Washington Volunteer Regiment. And if you can see on his cap there, 1st Washington Regiment from M Company, if you can see that M down there. So that's pretty cool. When we come over here, then we finally start getting to the Rough Riders with my favorite president, Mr. Roosevelt. And this is kind of what they started looking like now that the Spanish War started. So we get away from that blue, kind of sort of bright colors, and we finally start getting into the more field drab that is more common in the 20th century and stuff. So this is what that uniform, and one thing that I noticed too is that back then most of the buttons were brass and really and sparkly and stuff, and now we're finally starting to get into not brass buttons anymore, and kind of stick into that sort of camouflage-ness with more modernized uniforms. And over here, this is just an example of a winter coat, and if you can see, we have the new British-styled helmet on the top there. And this isn't British though. This is still U.S. military. So yeah, and this is just leading into World War I as well. So we get away from hats and kepis, and we start finally going into actual helmets for combat, which is really cool. So if we come over here, we have some examples of World War I. We've got some shaving kits. We also have some bandages as well. We have original duct tapes, watches, mirror for shaving, your pay record here. That's pretty cool. This is for your pay as an enlistment. We have a good example of a helmet here, and then we also this is a uniform for the First World War, for the doughboys as they called it. This one here, just looking at the uniform, this guy is is an MG soldier, so an MG means machine gun, of course, and he's from C Company. And if you can see on the side here, well, first of all, he is a private, and he's also, if you see that tree here, that is actually that's their division patch for actually here in Fort Lewis around this time, and they were actually called the Wild Ones because they did a lot with cutting down trees and all that. But don't be confused with the Spruce Division that was in Holcomb and Aberdeen and all that. Those are different regiments. And then over here, oh, and also actually, here's a service medal here from World War I, and also another M1919 as well. And then we have a service cap right above that as also. And then over here, here's that example of that first 1917 gas mask. And this is all original, of course. And then above that is a M1919 and also a Springfield rifle. And then down here is also a trench knife. Now, knives back then, not knives back then, but the purpose for when you have hand-to-hand combat and trench fighting, you got to get down and dirty, and things happen in the trenches, especially when you're trying to keep yourself alive. And so what they did was they got a knife and they basically converted it with brass knuckles. So it was a knife with brass knuckles, and you were able to punch and slash and all sorts of stuff, and that's called the trench knife because it was used for the trenches in World War I. Over here we got some cool uniforms of an officer here leading his men on after getting out of the trenches. We see the M1919 here, started in the service in World War I. We still have them today. We have, if you come here, we see that the gaiters. So back then, the officers got the really nice uniforms, of course, but also they got really better protection for their legs, and we have leather gaiters. And if you see on this one, this guy's just a regular infantryman. He actually has just cloth that is wrapped around his calves there. So, and that is from that's mostly influenced from British uniforms during the First World War. So, and this is also U.S. Marine Corps uniform because of that olive drab, and the khaki uniform is more of the U.S. Army. So, if you come over here. This is really cool. This is all World War I German artifacts. So we have an enlistment, or actually no, this is an artillery, because you see the red piping. But this is an artillery German uniform here, and we also have a machine gun right here. This is a Mauser right here. This is a Mauser 98, and then up here we have this long bayonet here for their rifles as well. And this is really cool here. We got some original barbed wire. This is a grenade. This is just like a little, the Germans kind of they have the stick grenades that everybody, they were called potato mashers. A lot of people know the stick grenades, but they also have some little grenades too, which were about that big, and that's kind of one of them right there. That's one of the styles. There's a couple of styles. And they also use that from World War I also to World War II. And then we have some iron crosses here. And these are World War I, so they say 1919 on them. So that's pretty cool. And I actually, in my collection, I do collect World War II artifacts. And I do have a wide variety of Nazi memorabilia, and just for educational purposes and just because, preserving history. And I do have a couple of iron crosses too, and they're probably my favorite pieces in the collection, besides the helmets and the flags. So, and also, that's a Luger right there, and that is the one that the U.S. Army was going to have issued but then we went with the M1919. So if you didn't know what a Luger looks like, that's what it looks like. And it's also used in World War II as well. So come over here, we're finally gonna get into World War II. And over here, we just have your standard M1 carbine over here. And we also have some field dressing here. This is bandages right here, and this would go into that pouch right there. So that goes into there. This is more medical. This is a field manual. This is pretty cool. I actually have this same exact field manual, medical field manual in 1942. So that's pretty cool. And also just some standard medical equipment here. This isn't, of course, all that a infantry medic would carry. He would carry 2 gigantic bags about that big on both sides, and he would also carry 4 water bottles. Each guy would carry, or water bottles, canteens. Of course, each guy would carry 1 canteen, but in the Pacific, because it's so humid, hot, and muggy, in the Pacific, they were actually, standard issue was 2 canteens. 1 on this side, 1 on this side. But the reason why the medics had more canteens was because of course, tending to their men, making sure that they're hydrated, and making sure that they are they have enough energy to fight. And also, it was kind of a sad story of cruelty of war. Medics were not allowed to give wounded men any water at all, because of course it's a waste, especially if you have a gut wound as well. So that's kind of sad. So if you come over here, we got some good examples of U.S. weapon or U.S. Uniforms in the Second World War in the Pacific Theater. So that's pretty cool. It's just standard. This is U.S. military, so and everything. But anyway, if we continue on here, we just got done with, I said that these were Marine. I wasn't taking a closer look at them and stuff like that when we were off camera. These are actually U.S. Uniforms here. So when they came along, when the U.S. came along in Guadalcanal with the Marines, this is what they wore right here. And then over here we have some Japanese stuff. We have a flag right here with some Japanese writing on it. Also is written all of the guys out of this company who captured this flag during the Pacific. And then also we have a Naboo here, a Naboo pistol, and which was the sidearm for the Japanese Imperial Army, and also some binoculars as well. And then this is the standard uniform for the Japanese soldier during the Second World War. We have a canteen there. This actually is a lieutenant right here for the 2 stars right here on the collar. And then his helmet right there, which, as you can see, it's got a cool star on there and everything. Yeah. And then these are the rifles for the Imperial Japanese Army, and these are called Arisakas right here. And these are one of my favorite rifles during the Second World War, just because they look really cool. And plus, when you hold it if you can see right behind the bolt, right there on that piece of metal there, that's kind of where you would, which if you back up, right there. Right there, and then right there is actually the imperial seal of the emperor, and they had that on all of their Arisaka rifles. Down here we got long bayonet. Now the Japanese had really long bayonets for their rifles. Right here is a Japanese grenade right here, and then this is another version of it. Now, if you zoom in really close, you'll see that there's a pin. There's a pin on there, and then you pull out that pin, and then what you do is you tap the top. So you would tap it like that, and a lot to ignite it, and then you would throw it. Now, what would happen was the Japanese would usually pull the pin, and then they would hit it on their helmets and then throw it, right? Now, once the war started kind of coming to a close, Japan was losing, and a lot of their factories were being bombed by by the U.S. Air Force, because we had more of a foothold on Japan, a lot more airfields in the Pacific. They started making their fuses a lot cheaper for their grenades. In a lot of instances, since they would pound on their helmets and then throw it, a lot of the times when they would hit it, it would actually ignite right then and there and blow them up. So that's not good. And that was happening later during the war. And so this we got some like radio communication set here, and if you can see, I think it's pretty cool. They have the wiring schematic right there on the inside of the radio. I'm actually coming back to here. That big huge, this thing right here is actually a mortar case, and then here is the actual mortar right here, and this is actually a light mortar is what it's called, because you can just carry it as a guy would carry on. It would be put on your back, and then you could just put it in the field. You would just put it in the ground with the tube, and then you would just put that case in, and it would drop down. And then actually, instead of like a regular mortar where when you drop the shell down, it hits the ground and then shoots up instantly. In this one, the Japanese had it to where you would put the shell into the mortar, and it would sit down the bottom until you hit the trigger, and then it would shoot up. So that's kind of a difference between mortars of the Allies and Japanese. This here is a Type 95 machine gun, and this was actually nicknamed the Woodpecker because it made a certain sound when it fired. It was like that, sound like a woodpecker. And then also we have, I forget what this one is called. This is another type something, but this is a light machine gun right here. This is a heavy machine gun. Of course, you would have to have a tripod to put this on, and you would just sit down like this and fire like that. But this one here has a tripod built into the machine gun, and then you can just set it down and fire it wherever, or you can shoot from the hip. And then we also have some Japanese samurai swords as well, mostly for officers, of course. The enlistment didn't have swords at all. And then here is a good example of a M1919. If you come close, this is the Browning M1919. This muzzle here, you see this muzzle used in a lot of war movies. It kind of ticks me off because it was mostly used without it, but it depends on kind of the theater as well of where those muzzle breakers were used and where they weren't. So yeah, and then actually, thing to note too, this uniform here, if you see, it's not an olive drab, it's more of a khaki color. This is the M41 jacket that I was talking about. And then they moved to the M43, which is more olive drab in green. Talk about this really quick. I thought this was really cool and unique that they have a kind of thing about it. The Japanese actually did invade Alaska at one point, a couple of the islands, but we invaded, we won, so it's all good. Now we finally got to the World War II section here. This is a Waffen SS. This is Hitler's elite forces. This is a uniform, and you can always tell the SS because of the SS on the collar there. And also here they had a band around their collar explaining what unit they were from as well. So, and plus, this is when, in the first time ever in World War II, camouflage is being used. And we can think that all from the Germans, actually. The Germans actually wore camo in the first place. And we actually started wearing camo as well during the Normandy campaign. But it was quickly replaced because everybody who affiliated camo affiliated it with Germans. So when you saw camo guys, clearly they're Germans. And plus the US camo was actually quite identical to the German camo. So after a couple of people getting accidentally shot and killed in battle, they got rid of that. No more camo for the U.S. and we won't see that until only the helmet covers in the Vietnam War. So if we come over here, we take a little bit look at the uniform here. This is an M44, or not an M44. This is an MP40 ammo pouch here, which is mostly used. The MP40 was mostly used for NCOs, non-commissioned officers. This is a bread bag here, and it came in different colors for Luftwaffe, which means Air Force. That would be a blue color. And then this is a canteen right here. This is their canteen. Actually, their mess kit, their cup is actually placed on top of that as kind of a lid to the canteen. So that's pretty cool, and I do have one of those in my collection, which is really nice, but I don't have that canteen on top. This is really cool here. This is a parade little dagger that would go on the hip here for SS officials or Waffen-SS, Nazi officials in the party and all that. We have some different varieties of handguns for the Germans. We have the Luger here. This is the P08 Luger, and then that is the P08 Walter. And the Walter was late in the war traded out from the Luger. So this is late war, this is early war sort of. And then this is really cool. This is a automobile flag that you would put on the ends of the or on the front of the automobile, signifying who is in the vehicle as well. And then over here, this is an MP44. This is the first assault rifle ever in the history of ever. The Germans made the first assault rifle, and this came with big, huge shell casings about that big. And this was the first assault rifle, and after this, assault rifle was now a common term for military use. And then we have a canteen over here, another canteen. This is actually a backpack for the Germans, and this wasn't standard issue, but for mountain troops, it was more of a standard issue for them. And then this is the NCO MP40 here that was used by NCOs as well. And then over here, this is the MG34, not the MG42. The MG34, you can always tell if it's an MG34 because of the barrel and the ventilation of the holes right here to ventilate it out. And if you come close, you can always see that the MP43, those holes there to ventilate it, and in the MG42, they got rid of that, and what they did was they just made it to where you can replace the barrels, and then you would just open the barrel basically like this, and then you would take out the old barrel, which was hot and worn down, and then you would just stick a new barrel in there. And a lot of the times, U.S. infantry forces learned to use tactics around that, and would try to attack when they would have to switch out their barrels, which was a good thing to do, so that way you wouldn't get killed. And then over here, this is an M1 carbine, and then this is an M1 Garand with a scope on it. This is your standard infantry uniform for the U.S. Army. And so a thing to note about this is that this is, again, another M1 or M41, the khaki uniform here instead of the olive drab. So this is a more early war. And then over here, this is pretty much based off of Saving Private Ryan. Now the difference is the Rangers. This is from the Ranger division here. Now the Rangers, a thing to know about them is that they are veterans. They were one of the divisions that landed on Normandy beaches, and they already had combat experience. They fought in North Africa, and they fought in Sicily, and they fought in Italy. And they knew they fought the Germans before, they knew how they worked, and they even beat Italy as well. And so they were kind of the outdated guys. And this one, they wore the M41 jacket, not the new M43. But a thing to note is that only for the Rangers, this is only for the Ranger divisions, they actually wore these pants that were called, this is called OD green. And they were kind of tactical pants, and this is only specific for the Ranger units. And you can find all of this out. Find this entire uniform here in Saving Private Ryan, if you watch it in Saving Private Ryan. So yeah, and then this black bag here, this is a canvas bag. And this was only for D-Day. And this would hold your gas mask, and it's waterproof, and they would put tar over it. It was a canvas bag, and then they put a lacquer over it, making it waterproof. So that's what we have right here. And then this, of course, is a corporal from 2 chevrons right there. And then he has his doughboy backpack, which is styled from the World War I backpack during the First World War. So that's why it's called doughboy pack. And then you have your M1 helmet in standard issue, which the M1 helmet was from World War II all the way until, I would say, after Vietnam, pretty much. So we used the M1 helmet, that style, for a very long time. And then over here is a North African, this isn't African, this is a North Africa. North Africa was the division that was stationed in Africa during World War II, and this is a German uniform here. Now, a thing to know about this German uniform is that the lime green piping, that means mountain troops here. And also, he's a corporal as well, and those 2 chevrons, or those 2 ribbons right there on that. So the one at the bottom that is mostly red, but if you see it has a black and a white stripe, but it's very tiny, that signifies that this guy fought on the Western Front, or the Eastern Front against the Russians. And the other one on top of there, which has a very bold black stripe, then the white, and then the red, that means Western Front. So this guy also saw combat during in Europe as well. So yeah, that's pretty much it for that. And of course, classical steel helm. And also the Africa Corps had more of a greenish, as you can tell, a more greenish uniform too, but they also used a desert khaki uniform as well. It was just whatever you could get pretty much, and that pretty much signifies the German army. It's whatever you can really get. So okay, so now we're finally getting over to the Korean War. So if you come over here, this is a PPSH. This was originally used by the Russians during the Second World War, and it was a very fast firing weapon. And actually, a lot of the Germans, because it took the same round as the German MP40, the Germans would actually steal these off of the Russian bodies and actually just use the PPSHs in the German army. So that's kind of funny. So this is just some regular rifles here. These are Mosin Nagants. And the thing to know about the Korean War is basically everything that the Koreans are using in this conflict are pretty much all Russian made, mostly because of communism. They're all communist countries. So over here, this is a good example of the M43 uniform for the Korean War, and this time in the Korean War, a lot like the Marines of the Pacific fighting the Japanese during the Second World War, they wore camouflage helmet covers as well. So, yeah. Coming over here, this is just your standard uniform for the North Korea, I should say. During the war. It was mostly built for warm climate, and also it's pretty much almost exactly the same as the Russian uniforms for winter warfare during the Second World War. So, and you could probably see that just by looking at it. We've already seen these weapons before World War II, U.S., and coming over here. Here's actually some U.S. Uniforms here. This is just snow uniforms here to blend in with the camouflage. Nothing really too significant about the uniform. Coming over here, this is when we started getting into Vietnam, and so this is just your standard uniform here for the Vietnam era. And this here, you can tell that they are a nurse and they are a captain. Yeah, just by the symbols there on the collar. This is when we're finally starting to get shotguns, sorta, more common for soldiers in warfare, especially for the U.S. I mean, we've had shotguns from the Great War, from World War I, and also used a lot in the Pacific theater, shotguns, but this is when we're finally starting to get into more modernized shotguns as well. And then this is, of course, the M14, which was the standard issue in the beginning, I wouldn't say the beginning of Vietnam, I would say pre-65, when we had military advisors in Vietnam helping the South Vietnamese repel the communist northern Vietnamese. But this is still what they used though for training. This is what my grandfather, as a Marine, the 2nd Marines during 68, full metal jacket, that's the gun right there. So very iconic gun for the U.S. Marines and for the Vietnam era as a whole. And we actually still use, there was only one unit in Afghanistan today that still uses the M14, and they are a sniper division, and they are currently serving with those rifles. Coming here, we also have a thumper. This is called a thumper. This is an M67, and this would basically, like a grenade launcher, sort of like in the movies when it has that tube and then doof, that's what it kind of sounds like in the movies. This is what it fires, is those grenade cartridges, sort of, not actual grenades, but that's what they're called, grenade cartridges. So they would use that, and it was basically kind of a more support for an infantry unit. And then also here we have the M60. This thing is awesome. This thing was called the Pig just because it was just so beefy and fat. But this is the standard issue machine gun for U.S. forces in Vietnam, in Cambodia and Laos and all that. Over here we have a uniform here. This is, I'm pretty sure this is not Colonel or General Westmoreland's uniform. This is just a replica of General Westmoreland. If you don't know who he is the commanding officer of all forces in Vietnam during the Vietnam War conflict. So, and then also this is when finally camo starts coming out into the U.S. Army, and this is called Tiger Stripe camo. A good example of this is the Green Berets with John Wayne in it, and also Apocalypse Now. Martin Sheen wears this type of camouflage. Over here we have some communist Vietnamese weapons. We have the MP4, or the, not the MP40, but the PPSH, which was also, again, communist, and that's the same thing with Korea, is because while we were over there was to repel communism, and since they were a communist state, they were helped by the Russians and Chinese manufacturers because they were all communists, and they were trying to, you all know. But anyway, this is a AK-47, mostly known as the bad guy gun. This is kind of like the iconic weapon of U.S. enemies. And of course there's different versions as well as the AK. There's several different versions. This is a standard infantry uniform for the U.S. troops in Vietnam at the time. This is the M16. The M16 is what replaces the M14 rifle, all over there. So this was a disaster at first, and a lot of good men were killed because of stuff going on with the gun, like getting grime in it. It was had a lot of malfunctions, and it wasn't too keen on the muddy jungle conditions that Vietnam welcomed and it jammed a lot, and it got a lot of people killed because of it. And then they came out with another version during the Vietnam War, which once 67 came around, I'm pretty sure that's when they actually started coming out with a good M16, and that's what they were using during the Vietnam conflict. So, and then if you come here close for the on the uniform here, this vest here. This vest is actually seen as a bulletproof vest, even though it wasn't bulletproof. They called it that though. And this vest wasn't actually issued for U.S. troops, or I should re-say that, U.S. Army troops. The jacket, which is called a flak jacket, was actually only issued to U.S. Marine units in Vietnam. So again, a good example. Full metal jacket, you'll see them all have those flak jackets on, but the U.S. Army or the AirCap or anything, they didn't use those. So, alright. Okay, so now we just got out of the Vietnam War, and now we're over to the Iraq War, or Desert Storm as well, just somewhere around there. So, right here we can see this is a uniform. This is camouflage, mostly used for the Republic of Iraq. This was soldiers for them for the Republic of Iraq, meaning Iraq country as a whole, not the Taliban or anything like that. These guys were fighting with us in the Iraq War and Desert Storm and all that, and against Saddam Hussein, Baghdad, and all that, or Fallujah too. Got some gas masks here. This is pretty cool. Up here we have a ID card up here. This is a flare gun right there. This is a kind of a goofy style of a M1 helmet. This is actually not the helmet itself. This is the liner that goes inside of the helmet. And then over here, we have some Russian guns, manufactured guns. And then also this is kind of like an AK style sniper rifle here. So this is kind of the sniper rifle of the Taliban and Iraq forces fighting against the U.S. And which all of this is still used against us today. ISIS uses it a lot, and a lot of other Afghanistan, Syrian kind of rebels use. And then over here is this is the new uniform. This is the next version from the Tiger Striped in Vietnam, and now we're finally getting into camo for the U.S. troops. And this here was called the chocolate chip camo, and this is mostly because it looks like chocolate chips, and that's what the U.S. Soldiers called it. Here's some more examples of the chocolate chip uniform camo. And also, we are introducing a new camo. If you can see that vest there, that's woodland camo, and that's mostly used during the 80s and the 90s as well. So, yeah. And also gas masks too, because they were afraid of gas attacks from Saddam Hussein and all that going on in the Middle East. So, yeah, pretty cool. And which actually, it's so unique because like it's so it didn't happen a long time ago, you know. That's the thing you got to remember. It wasn't long ago, you know. It's still history, but I mean, I'll be going to class and walking through the parking lot at the campus of the college, and you'll see stickers of older guys that fought in the Iraq War, in Baghdad, Fallujah, and everything. They're going to classes with me, and it's pretty unique. It's pretty cool. Here is just modern day. This is the modern day era uniform that we see from, I would say, around the 2000s until today. This is called digital camo. Now, digital camo is slowly being replaced by a thing called multicam, and that's probably my favorite camo of today. Probably multicam is pretty awesome, and we'll show you a picture at the end of the video too of multicam and what it looks like. So, yep, pretty cool. And also, just one more thing before we just hit the end here, but just one more thing. This here is in the middle of that chocolate chip camo. They went from the chocolate chip camo all the way to this one here. And this one was used in Fallujah, and also if you've seen Black Hawk Down, this uniform is also used. And then we go to the digital camo that you see right over there. So, and then also this is this right here. This is a RPG. This is rocket propelled gun, and this is still used today by forces against U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria, and yeah. And this was also, the RPG was also used by the Viet Cong as well in the Vietnam War as well. So yeah. So, which was kind of funny is I noticed that we actually went around this little part right here, and we actually skipped this. This is a Viet Cong uniform, or actually I wouldn't say, I guess it's half and half Viet Cong, or it could be actual NVA, which was the NVA, which was actually the official army of the North Communist Vietnam. Yeah, so we have an AK down here, some sandals here, which was actually mostly used by the Viet Cong. We have some Russian guns here, communist weapons, and then also talking about RPGs, the rocket-propelled guns that are used in Iraq, were also used by the Viet Cong and NVA forces during the Vietnam era. This is one example of one of those rocket-propelled guns. So, yeah. All right, so we are out. Here's what the museum looks like. So we're out here on the outside, of course, and they got tanks and all sorts of ACUs and a lot of stuff. Right here, of course, you probably know what this is. This is, of course, the M1A1 or M4A1 Sherman tank. And then if you can tell, you can see the front of this is more of a curved armor, and this was used more of in North Africa and Sicily. And then once they got into Normandy, they started actually, instead of casting these in one big pile, they started making them into pieces, and then they would weld them on the sides and stuff like that, which you can't really see right here. But it was more of a block though than a kind of a curved armor, as you can see here. So. It'd be a good time to answer some of the questions here for the assignment, and that is what day and time we came. We got here at 11:30ish, maybe even noon here on Sunday, and it's actually what day is it today?
The 18th.
Today is the 18th, and so shame on me. The assignment's due tomorrow, but we haven't had time though to show up here, and it is a process too. We've had to go to the sort of a DMV sort of. We had to go and get permission to go on the base, and with our IDs and everything, get paperwork to get onto the base, and so, but we're finally here though, and yeah. And the reason why we chose this museum was just, I mean, come on, you can't find this at the Polson Museum, you know? I mean, this is just straight up awesome here. So, and plus, I'm a military history buff too. So, also the main purpose of this museum, if we go to their website here. Okay, so it took me a while to find it, but on their website though, when I was looking up this museum, on the directions and things about the museum before we went here, the thing that I noticed was under their logo it says inspire, educate, and preserve, and that pretty much sums it up right there of their mission here at Fort Lewis Museum, is to preserve military history for future generations, and also to inspire those young generations to serve their country, or just be simply proud, or thank veterans that have served in their family as well, and also just to educate them on military history and what made this country, you know, what it is today. I would say the most interesting thing about the Lewis Museum is probably the tanks. I mean, where can you find a Sherman tank anywhere? Not the Polson Museum. I mean, no disrespect on the Polson Museum, but I mean, there's a Sherman tank behind me, and over there is a Chaffee tank, an M42 Chaffee tank. And then over there is a Patton tank, right over there, and then there's a Stewart tank, and then there's an M43 half track. I mean, come on now, come on. And then this beautiful historical site too, which also had history in housing German prisoners of war as well. So one of the things I learned about the Lewis Museum is more in depth on what happened here at the Lewis Museum, and that's for the POWs and everything like that. I knew that we had some kind of encampment here during the Second World War, but I didn't know how grand it was. And like I said before, almost 5,000 German soldiers from Europe fighting in World War II were right here in Washington, close to Grace Harbor. That's quite incredible. And then one of the things that changed my personal view, I can't really find anything. I mean, I'm a U.S. history man through and through, America first kind of guy, and well, I should say conservative, I guess. But this is all U.S. history, and I would die for it. I absolutely love it, and it's something that I've always been fascinated with growing up, and yeah. So this was our journey at the Fort Lewis Museum here in Fort Lewis, Washington, and had a good time.